I won't tell you which of those scores more accurately reflects my student life, but I'm happy to have 100% from a lot of those organizations. Folks, how many folks here are from Colorado? Would you raise your hand? How many folks here are not from Colorado? Well, I want to welcome all the folks that are not from Colorado to Broncos country. The Super Bowl champions, and some think that God doesn't root for different teams in football games. We in Colorado know that God is a Broncos fan because our sunsets are blue and orange. I also want to thank RedState for giving me this opportunity. RedState is a great, this gathering is a great place to really ponder our future as conservatives. And that's one of the things that we're going to have to do after the presidential election, regardless of who wins the presidential election, is to figure out who we are as conservatives and where we want to go. I got to D.C. at the beginning of 2015, the beginning of last year. And you hear a lot of things about D.C. and the R's don't get along with the D's. And I remember a story that I was told about a Republican congressman who was working out on a treadmill in the House gym. And Rahm Emanuel was working out next to him. And Rahm Emanuel used to be in the House, and then he was President Obama's chief of staff at the time that they were working out together in the gym. And now, of course, he's the mayor of Chicago. But this Republican congressman had a seizure and hit the ground and was unconscious. And to tell the story in his words, he said, you know, I thought I had died. And I opened my eyes and I saw Rahm Emanuel looking down at me and I thought I'd gone to hell. And I tell that story because it is very common to hear stories about how the R&Ds don't get along in Congress. And I have to tell you something, in my experience, there is a great working relationship between Republicans and Democrats who want to spend more money. And there's a great working relationship between Republicans and Democrats who want more government control over our economy. And if you're a lobbyist in Washington, D.C., Congress works great. And Washington, D.C. is the model of efficiency. Think about 2015. We had, by the way, without a major war and without a major recession, we had over $500 billion of deficit spending. We passed a reauthorization of No Child Left Behind. We passed a 5-year transportation bill that blew away all the past numbers for transportation bills. People say that we're in gridlock. We're not in gridlock. D.C. works too well in doing the things that so many in D.C. want to do. And that's one of the issues that, as conservatives, we've got to figure out, what is it that we want to do? What is it, how do we exert more influence? How do we get back to where we know the country needs to go? And I have to tell you, I have struggled in my times in D.C. What does it mean to be a Republican? What does it mean to be a conservative? Why am I here? And it's really a struggle when I look around. And very honestly, this presidential election season has not helped me answer that question. In fact, it's made it a little bit more confusing. If you can remember back a few months ago, we had an avowed socialist running for president. And the only beautiful thing about the Democrat primary in my mind was the avowed socialist in so many states got more votes, more popular votes than the other candidate. But the other candidate got more delegates to the national convention. And there's something that's beautiful about a socialist who believes in from each according to his ability to each according to her need. Losing votes from Bernie Sanders. I mean, that's justice. If there is any justice in this election cycle, that is probably the closest that we get to justice. And now we have two candidates running, and one of those candidates is a candidate who should have an ankle monitor on at all times. A candidate that should have to trade in her pantsuits for an orange jumpsuit. a candidate that should have to apply to a probation officer for permission to travel out of state. But folks, the really sad thing is that candidate's ahead in the polls. So what does that say about us? I'm trying to figure out who we are as conservatives and who I am, and the first place I look is our past. And I think about our founding fathers, and I think about the patriots that risked their lives and their fortunes and their families and their honor to give us what we've got today. And I think about the sacrifice that they made and the fact that they rebelled against the British Crown because they were denied certain economic freedoms, certain legal freedoms, certain moral freedoms. And that rebellion created the country. And their adherence to the principles that had started with the Greek philosophers and really worked their way up to that unbelievable document, the Declaration of Independence, was clear through history. And their sacrifice is something that we should recognize and something that we should really hold dear, because we're going to be making a sacrifice in the near future. And I hope it's not as great as that. But if you look at where we are, it's important to see where we've been. And it's not only the patriots that founded this country that should inform our decision on where we need to go. We are the inheritors of the party of Lincoln and the party of Reagan. And as Republicans, we have stood up for what's right. We have given voice to those that are the most vulnerable among us. We are the party that was born out of the anti-slavery movement. And not only have we taken principled positions, but we've taken unpopular positions in the past because they were the right thing to do. Slavery, abolitionists were not popular. They were unpopular. And yet, as a party, we stood for that. And I think it's time to recognize the boldness of our predecessors and recognize that sometimes being right means you're going to be unpopular. And until we can educate and until we can convince, that may not be the popular position, but it doesn't make it the wrong position. It makes it the right position. Thomas Paine said that it is the patriot's duty to stand up against the government for his or her country. And I think that still is true today, and that's what I see in Washington, D.C. So where are we today in terms of where we need to go? We have $19 trillion of debt. We have over $19 trillion. We have over $100 trillion of unfunded liabilities. Folks, we are financially bankrupt. If we continue to saddle our children and our grandchildren with our debt, we are morally bankrupt. You can clap. You don't have to just raise your hand. You can clap if you want. There you go. What we have wrought in debt and deficit isn't merely a fiscal challenge or an economic problem. It is a moral catastrophe. It is poisonous to our human potential, and it puts at risk what Ronald Reagan called the American experiment. And I think that what we can see, not just in the fact that one of the Democrats who ran for office got nearly won running as a socialist, I think it's pretty clear that we have a division in this country between those who believe in more government control and those who believe in less, those who believe in socialism and those who believe in capitalism and democracy. Winston Churchill said it best, in my view. He said, socialism is a philosophy of failure, the creed of ignorance, and the gospel of envy. Its inherent virtue is the equal sharing of misery. And one of my favorite presidents is Calvin Coolidge. And I don't know if you've read much of Calvin Coolidge, but he is worth the time to read. he said that when you look at the Declaration of Independence, when you look at the document that our founders really created to set ourselves apart from the monarchies in England, we proclaimed three truths: that all men are created equal, that we have certain inalienable rights, and that government derives its power from the governed. Those are the three truths that this country was founded on. And and Calvert Coolidge says, if those are the three truths, then those are final. And any alteration to those three truths is a step backwards, not a step forwards. This idea that progressives are trying to convince the American public that more government control over health care is a step forward is nonsense. We had not the right answer in health care, but we had the right answer in terms of human freedom going into that debate. And we have the right answer in so many other areas. You know, my friend in Alabama told me the other day that there is a red snapper issue in Alabama. Anybody here from Alabama? No, one person way back there. We love your college football, but not so much your pro football. You don't have pro football. Maybe that is a pro football team, masquerading as a college football team. But the red snapper, the federal government has decided that it is going to regulate the number of days that private fishermen can fish red snapper in Alabama. And so they went out, federal government went out and studied how many red snapper there were. And they determined that there just weren't enough red snapper. And so they limited the number of days to 9 days of fishing red snapper. So you had all these business people that had invested in bait shops and boats and reels for taking individuals out to fish red snapper. So the industry hired some universities in the area to go out. Well, it turns out the federal government was looking on sandy bottom areas for red snapper, and they are found among the reefs. And so they were looking in the wrong place, but they still had the power to limit the number of days that you could fish red snapper. Where in the Constitution does it tell us that the federal government should be limiting the number of days that people should be fishing? And I wouldn't even argue that that's not navigable water. That's navigable water, but it still doesn't give them the right to do that. Where in the federal government should be dictating minimum wage policy? Where in the Constitution does it tell us that the federal government should be talking about the role of the franchisee and the franchisor? Or overtime rules? Go on and on and on. And what we've lost with this bureaucracy that's evolved is we've lost the freedom to decide who represents us in government, because we have created a government that doesn't answer to anybody and is really unanswerable even to the president, although they clearly appreciate one side more than the other when they are working for a president. But that to me is the greatest freedom that we have lost. And we will continue to lose that in all areas unless we come together as conservatives and figure out what our purpose is and how to move forward. Folks, thank you so much for having me today, and God bless you. I would love to answer a few questions if there are a few questions. Yes, sir.
Sir, I'm actually one of your constituents. I live in Douglas County, Colorado. We talked about the past of the Republican Party.
Do you want to use the microphone? Sure. He just said he was one of my constituents. So obviously a very bright young man.
Thank you. We talked about the past of the Republican Party. What is the future of the Republican Party, and what role will millennials play in that?
What role do you want to play? I got to tell you, I think it's wide open right now. The reason I was talking about the past of the Republican Party is because I believe that it informs who we should be as a future. And I think in the past we have been bold, and I think in the past we have been proud, and I think in the past we have been fearless. And I look at Ronald Reagan, and I look at so many other Republican presidents who were willing to take on tough issues. I got to tell you, I go to a lot of events, and I hear people, young people say, what role do you think millennials have? I never asked anybody, what role should I have? I clawed and scraped and kicked and punched and got what I wanted to get. And I would suggest that millennials get some boxing gloves and sharpen your teeth and join the fight, because we are spending your money.
Thank you, sir.
And I don't mean that in a derogatory way at all. I really hope that millennials do change where we're going, because my generation's gotten it wrong, miserably wrong. And so I hope that millennials, they say that millennials were attracted to Bernie Sanders. That's a scary proposition to me, because what millennials need to do, in my opinion, is to fight for more freedom. My daughter is a millennial, and she said to me a couple of years ago, she said, "Dad, you want to know what this election is about? It's about trans fats." I said, "Well, okay, sweetheart, I haven't seen that on the polling data, but okay." And she said, "No, it's about trans fats. I don't use trans fats. I don't want trans fats in my food, but I don't want the government telling me I can't use trans fats." That's what this election is about, is whether we're going to have people that are accountable for their own actions, or whether we're going to have a government that is going to take care of us in a nanny state and make all of our decisions for us. And I think millennials, more than any other generation, sees the benefits of the iPhone, sees the internet, sees all of the technology that we have, and appreciates freedom more than any generation we've had, because you've had more freedom. And I really hope that you take over sooner rather than later, before we mess this up so bad that we can't turn this around.
Thank you, sir.
In my view, you guys like you in the House, the Freedom Caucus, and maybe about 5 guys in the Senate are pretty much the last line of defense for freedom in America as we've known it. And I'm always curious, what's the morale like in the House Conservative Caucus? Do you guys feel like Custer's last stand, or are you hopeful, or what?
I'll tell you, first let me address the Senate part of that. You know, the root word for Senate is the same as the root word for senile. I'm just saying. I think that, I think there is great morale. We've got a conservative elected to John Boehner's seat. We lost a conservative in western Kansas. We are fighting to enlarge the numbers of conservatives that we have in the House. If you look at the situation, a presidential year, we are more likely to lose a few Republicans in the House, and Democrats are likely to gain a few, which gives that House Freedom Caucus more leverage in terms of getting to 218. So we will actually have more influence this year than we've had, or next year than we've had in the past 2 years. But I think that the morale is good because being a conservative, we have always been in the minority. We've always been right, but we've always been in the minority. And so I think we are ready for the fight. Yes, sir. I have time for just one more question.
Sir, what is your perspective on Donald Trump?
Yeah. You know, I didn't... I don't know if I mentioned the Broncos to you. I will tell you my perspective on Donald Trump. Donald Trump is a heck of a lot better than Hillary Clinton. If we lose... You know, and I am a big RedState fan. I read RedState literally the first thing in the morning, every morning. But if we lose the Supreme Court, and RedState, and some of the people that post on RedState sort of poo-poo this argument, but if we lose the Supreme Court, we will be 40 or 50 years behind where we are right now. And I say that because all the rules that I mentioned, the waters of the U.S. and all those rules have been struck down by the Supreme Court. It is really the last hope that we have to enforce our constitutional principles. And while I disagree with them on health care and what they do with Obamacare and some of the other things, more often than not, they've got it right, and they have protected our our Constitution. So Donald Trump, I believe, will support conservative justices. I believe will pick those people around him that will make better decisions than Hillary Clinton. When I'm in Congress, folks, I have two choices. I can vote yes or I can vote no. Actually, I could vote president, but that would be too Obama-like, so I don't do that. But I could vote yes or no. And in this case, yes is Donald Trump and no is Hillary Clinton. And that's the choice we have for this country. God bless you, folks.
It is my pleasure to introduce next to the stage a gentleman who's been also a friend of the Red State Gathering, I believe. Ken, were you at our very first one in Atlanta? Since the very first one in Atlanta, Ken Cuccinelli has been with us. He has been, I'm sure you all know who Ken is. He doesn't need an introduction, but I'm going to give him one anyway. He's the former Attorney General of Virginia, ran for governor of Virginia, came this close to pulling that out. Since then, he has not accepted taking a back seat. He's been deep into the movement, helping to get conservative candidates elected, good office holders, people who we support at Red State. He was an advisor to